Hello and a very big warm welcome to this edition of the Soul Sync podcast. I'm Jason Paul. I hope you're keeping well. It's lovely to have you back. If you're new to the show, firstly, you're probably wondering, what is this music all about? I'm just feeling a bit dramatic today. I really liked this track when I found it. And I thought, why not? Now, if you are new to the Soul Sync and wondering what the podcast is all about, well, let me tell you, we ask lots of the big questions here about life, about energy, about one's soul's purpose, all designed to nourish your soul, really. So in this edition today, I'm going to be talking to Jason Rothwell. He's a remarkable individual with a unique and profound journey that has led him to become quite an influential figure in the world of spiritualism. Hailing from the birthplace of the co-operative movement in Rochdale, Lancashire, Jason's background and experiences are deeply rooted in the rich history of his hometown. From a young age, Jason possessed an extraordinary gift, the ability to provide readings and connect with the spirit world. Although he initially considers it a mere kind of cool trick, he soon realised the power and potential of his unique talent. Even within a family that didn't challenge the concept of spiritualism, Jason's abilities were evident and never discouraged. One pivotal moment in Jason's life was the loss of his beloved grandmother, an event that brought him closer to the divine. The profound presence of God he witnessed during her passing solidified his belief in a higher power that answers prayers. I really liked talking to Jason. I liked his honesty and I found him to be really refreshing. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. So Jason, firstly, a massive warm welcome onto the Soul Sync podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's very, very kind of you.
So I must admit, your form when I was reading it before you came on, you've got quite the story, and it's another one where my highlighter was out to put it this way, more of it is highlighted than not. Tell us, so you're from Rochdale in Lancashire, and you very helpfully told me that was the birthplace of the co-operative movement, and where the man who handed Emma Britain the Seven Principles spent a considerable amount of their career. So I loved that little bit of Rochdale history there. But tell us about your childhood, because that was the first thing that really jumped out to me when I was reading through your background.
Childhood. How would you say it? So, I mean, I got brought up by my mum, largely. I come from a broken home, if that's the right word. Don't really like the word.
There's no right or wrong word. It's how you feel, Jason.
And my mum and my stepdad brought me up. I spent a lot of time with my nana, as people tend to. Like, my nana was my best mate. And from a very young age, like, in terms of this conversation, spirit and the idea of spirits was not particularly anything strange. When my cousin Ryan passed away at 3 months old, my mum was quite open about the idea that he had come to visit her in the morning and told her that he would be passing away. And my mum, being my mum, just carried on with her day until her friends turned up and was like, your sister's lost her baby. And my mum was like, yeah, tell me something I don't know already. And my nana was very into spirits and the spirit world and went to see psychics and mediums quite often. I personally remember the first time I ever saw a spirit was a ballerina dancing on my window ledge. Whenever I couldn't sleep, this little ballerina appeared and started dancing. Yeah, it was and I mean, I don't know if this is important, but it inspires me to say it. But I'm not sure my childhood was an overly happy one. I wouldn't say it was an unhappy one, but it wasn't overly happy. The first time I ever witnessed somebody die, I was 4, and my uncle died in front of me and my nan. And that took me quite close to the idea of death at such a young age, which was quite a prominent feature. We lost quite a few people over a very short period of time. And I think I started giving readings in bits when I was like 10, 11. My nana showed me how to read cards. Um, Although when my dad found out that my nana was teaching me to read cards, he came in and picked them up and threw them over the balcony and was like, "Don't go teaching them any of that crap." Um, Such as it is, saved those cards and I still have them. And then I think I was like 13, 14 when I first started giving proper messages because I could feel people next to each other.
That's
But it just
still
started.
very young, isn't it? In the grand scheme, 13 or 14. You say that in a way, Jason, that almost makes it sound quite old for you because you'd had experiences at a much younger age. But I suppose I'm just trying to think to what I was doing at 12 or 13, and I certainly don't think I was that in tune with the spirit. How was it coming to you at that age, and who was you giving readings to?
And so I gave, like, when I was 15, 16, I gave readings to, like, my mum's friends. They'd come around. My mum would go in the kitchen, shut the door. We'd have a reading. Sometimes it'd be with cards. Sometimes it would be like, oh, a man just walked in the house with you. I remember one of my mum's friends, obviously won't say a name, but she walked into my mum's living room when I was about 15, and this little round man with a mustache walked in behind her. And I was like, there's a man here, and I think he's your dad. And it turns out she tried to kill herself the night before, and he'd come to tell her how silly he thought she was. And I mean, I have complete sympathy for anybody who does that. But at 14, 15, I just repeated what he said, and he was like, tell her she was stupid and she shouldn't do that again. Um, but it used to come to me by this idea that I used to say, if you close your eyes, you could see with your skin,
Yes.
and take your eyes away, and you could still see things moving around you, but you had to close your eyes. Which, interestingly, is why when I first ever stood on the rostrum, I did it with my eyes shut and looked like a bit of a Burke, to be honest. But
I think you described in your in the notes that you gave me that um back then it was allowing your mind to drift, and then things would come to you like that as a child, and I thought that was quite a nice way to kind of put it. Really, it kind of made a lot of sense.
yeah, so like, I mean, when I started work, like we all do, at like 17, and I used to do that with work colleagues, and that came like when I was younger, it came by like closing your eyes and letting your skin feel who was there. And
Mm.
then as I got a little bit older, I realized that if I just sort of let my mind wander slightly to the side, then pictures would start to flow in and I'd be able to say things. But I just used to think it was cool that you could scare people. You know, you'd be like, oh, there's a man here in a motorbike, I think. And they'd be like, oh my God, how have you got that? And it's like, does it make sense? And they'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you'd be like, I just thought it was quite a cool party trick.
So you you first attended a spiritualist church on your own around 14 years old. Tell us about that, because you also took went to the rostrum, initially after being refused. You went up there as well at quite a young age.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge gap between the first time I ever walked into a spiritualist church and the first time I took the rostrum. But the first time I walked into a spiritualist church without like my nan or without any sort of supervising adults was with me and a bunch of my friends, and we used to go to Haywood Spiritualist Church. Um, Terrifying woman known as Sheila Hill ran this place. She must have been in her 90s, but she was a fearful lady. And I remember, I mean, it was quite strange, really, because I was oddly skeptical. Even though I knew I could hear spirits and things, I actually was really oddly skeptical about mediums. And I didn't really like mediums. Even though I used to go to church, I used to be like, I'm not sure they're saying anything actually. And I used to sort of try and be clever and pick it apart. And then my cousin said to me, like, don't you fancy doing this? And I said, oh, I can do it anyway. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm going to get up there one day. And she was like, oh, don't be stupid, Jason. So I pulled Sheila Hill at the end of a service. And I said, I'd like to go on the rostrum. And she said, well, you have to go to awareness class first and then development class. And then I decide whether you get on the rostrum or not. And then I was like, oh, well, I didn't really want to do all of that. I just wanted to get up on the rostrum, to be honest. And, you know, the path I've took for myself is not the path I would advise for anybody else, which is has come with a bit of age and experience. But she says to me, Sheila Hill, she says, you'll never come to my circle. You'll never get on my rostrum. But the day that you go to church to finally do this, I will come and see you. And I was like, oh.
That's a bit cryptic, isn't it?
It was very.
But I bet that had an impact on you at that moment, Jason.
Well, considering I was like 14 and she looked like she was 90, I was like, this is never going to happen. She'd be dead before I even like past puberty, so there's no chance of her doing that. And without by cutting out the middle bit, just to go into when I first went to a spiritualist church to do it properly. It was one of Sheila Hill's students, unbeknownst to me, who directed me to go to this particular church. And I got there the first day and I knocked on the door and I was late. And the person running the church was like, you can't come in, we've already started. And I was like, well, surely you can let me in. Like, I'm only 5 minutes late. And he was like, 5 minutes is too late. Sorry, mate. And I was like, and I effed and jeffed as I walked down the street. And then this lady came to me and was just like, if you mean it, go back next week. So I went back next week and we did this meditation. And to be fair, I was like, this is really weird. You know, you sat in a dark room in a circle, lots of creepy people who, look, I was quite surprised by how many people there seemed really normal and ordinary. Like, I was expecting to sit in a room with a bunch of very weird people, thinking, you know, we're all going to sit and talk to the dead. And I was quite shocked by how normal they were. And I think that weirded me out more. But I got a message that
you was expecting robes and some kind of seance or something a bit more mystical.
Yeah, I was expecting some candles, maybe some robes. Obviously, I wasn't expecting any sacrifice.
I can relate to that. I can totally understand why you might have thought that. But I'm sure in one era that probably was the setup. I'm not sure what era that was, but
I mean, I'm sure there are still some churches around that maybe go into that sort of thing if that's their genre. But I got a message off this gentleman who was sat in the circle, and he just said, "There's a lady called Sheila stood behind you." And I was like, "Anything else with that?" And he said, "Yeah, she keeps telling me that she stood on a big hill." And I was like, I'm not sure that's what she is saying to you, to be honest. And he was like, oh, do you know what she's talking about? And I was like, I think I do. I think she's trying to tell you her surname, being Sheila Hill. And I was like, she promised she'd come and see me. And then, you know, I think it was about 3 or 4 months of sitting in circle. And I really got bored. And I couldn't be, to swear, I couldn't be bothered sitting in a circle anymore. Because I just wanted to get on with it. And I went to a spiritual centre in St Anne's called Serendipity. And I got my first booking. I got up in open circle and this lady said, would you like to come and serve my church? And I was like, absolutely. And then it went from there.
So,
and that's 7 years now.
So I think, you know, I took from your story as well. I think that one thing that really is a common theme amongst all mediums that I've met is one level of trauma or another that has kind of got them to that point, but um, you around the age of 27, you was in the grip of a really difficult time in your life, and tell us about that story and the experience, and how you it sounded like you almost had another kind of spiritual awakening as sorts. I took from those notes.
Yeah, I mean, like, so my nana died when I was 22.
And you said you were very close to her.
Yeah, she was my best friend. She
Yeah.
was like, I sometimes I try and caution how much I compliment her for not wanting to upset my mum. I love my mum dearly, but my nana was my world and my best friend, and she was my safe. I mean, I have told my mum this. My nana was my safe place, where it was only me and her. There was no shouting, no jostling, nobody to compete with. Um, and I was working in a school at the time, and when I found out she was going to pass away, I quit. I walked out, and I was like, "Look, I'm going to look after her until she passes away." And she died a few weeks later, with me sort of holding her. And because I knew she believed in the spirit world, because we'd been to see, I think we went to see Sally Morgan actually together. Um, my nana wasn't overly impressed, but I quite enjoyed it. My nana fell asleep.
It sounds like she was a tough critic. She had high standards, Jason, of her
Well,
mediums.
I think she was just old and nodded off. But I remember the morning after she died, and I demanded for her to come and see me. I was like, "You told me that you can't die, but now you look like you're dead. So come down and tell me you're okay." And she didn't. And that really did something to me. And I carried on sort of saying to them, like, "Please, if she's there, let her come and see me." And she didn't. And then I went to church only once or twice. And I was like, "Please, if you're there, come and see me." And she largely didn't. There was only one time where somebody gave me a message that felt like it could have been her. And I sort of basically turned around to them and said, "Right, if you're not going to talk to my nan and let me see her, I'm not going to talk to you." Like, simple. And there were other things I was dealing with, like, as many people do, a huge sense of rejection from other members of my family. There was some, I don't mind saying this because I've said it publicly before, but sorry if it's a bit sensitive. I was replugging through the fact that I had been sexually assaulted many years earlier and never really healed that. And I sort of slipped into this at about 26, into this really, really dark place where I thought I was going mad, for want of a better word. I wanted to end my life. And this lady kept appearing in my head. And I kept phoning my mum and I kept saying, "There's a lady in my head." And my mum's like, "Oh, right." I was like, "And she's alive." And my mum was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "This woman who's in my head, she's alive. I can feel her inside my body." And she was like, "You probably should go to the doctors, love." I went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said he could find nothing wrong with me. I sort of, really wanted some hardcore heavy drugs to make the lady go away, thinking, pill me up, it'd be fabulous. And he said, no. He said, "Why don't you go to a spiritualist church?" And I was like, "You want me to go to a spiritualist? As a psychiatrist, you were recommending a spiritualist?" And he was like, "I just can't find anything wrong with you. Therefore, I have to accept that perhaps you are experiencing something that I cannot explain." And that was probably one of the most profound, grown up and unprofessional conversations I've ever had in my life. And not to go on too much, but my mum.
Oh, please. Your stories. It's very interesting.
My mum sent me to a healer. And I was like, oh, you're going to make me better. She's going to wave her hands over me and cure me. And she was like, maybe not, Jason, but maybe. And I let this lady come to my house and she says, can we go talk privately? And I sat there, and I'll be honest, I sat there quite frankly and said, look, love, I've let you come because my mum's told me I should let you come. I don't need any healing. I don't need your help. I'd just like you to, do whatever and then tell my mum that you've been and done it. And she was like, okay, but can I try something, Jason? And I was like, yeah, do you like, but it's not going to do anything. And she said, well, I won't touch you because I know you don't like being touched. And I hadn't said
Mm.
that. So I was like, I don't know where you got that from, but I don't. So good. And they said, just let me put my hand near you then. It's like, fine. I was like, this is where you give me magic in it. And she was like, pretty much. And she called Haley. She had the roughest time. And just all of a sudden, I felt this little tingle and I burst into tears. And she was like, just let it all out. And I was like, I kept saying to her whilst I was sat there, and we were in this room, and I kept saying to her, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop it. And she was like, I thought I couldn't do anything. And I'm like, please stop. And that just blew my mind. And from there, everything spiraled. And that's when I sort of went a little bit worse, but then got quite a bit better, went to the spiritualist, like the psychiatrist had said. And 3 weeks into being a wannabe spiritualist, my depression vanished. And I started to realize that actually I needed to fix what was going on in my head.
And was that a process that happened quickly? Did it take a long time? How, or is it, sometimes I guess we still haven't unpacked a lot of these things. Even now, I keep finding things from my past that I thought were dealt with, but then I find myself back at them again. So I don't know if I'm asking you the impossible question.
Oh, absolutely. It's an ongoing process. And, the things that we healed to begin with, I look back now, and even though they felt they were the big things, they were probably the little things, the surface level stuff, validate, not being validated, feeling rejected, not being able to express anger properly, coming from, and, I can say this, coming from quite shallow places in my memories. Um, and actually now, 7 years later, I think some of the really important healing has begun, and I would say begun, and they come from memories that I kind of think are silly, but are, when I've touched into them, incredibly like powerful. Like being, to being very open, being told off for wetting the bed. It was something I was like,
Mm.
really? That's not a bad memory. It's just a memory. And then I pushed into it and I was like, wow, that has some seriously powerful emotions
It
deep down.
does. It's even things in my I had some crazy experience where some of my trauma was related to things that happened in my teenage years. Even I had an exercise done the other day where someone went to get soul fragments of mine, some shamanic exercise, without going off on a complete tangent. But one of the soul fragments which came back to me was um, a relationship that I had over 25 years ago. And I thought to myself, how on earth is that still a thing? So I can relate. And I think things that happen to you, especially in your childhood, well, I'm sure it's been proven time and time again, but it does have an impact, and it does. I guess we only are, but our lived experiences in a lot of ways, and these experiences you have, whether good, bad, or whatever, they stay with you, don't they? Some of the time.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when you say that, good or bad, I think one area of like healing that is perhaps overlooked is actually the positive thing, where you had a positive experience or felt a positive emotion, but actually learned a negative lesson. And so you sort of
Mm.
like carry on doing behavior because it gave you enjoyment or it gave you encouragement or validation. And actually, it's not a good thing. And I mean, the easiest thing to sort of link that to, it's like where people learn to express cruelty because they learned that hurting somebody made them feel better at one point. And
Well, that's
for them, that
interesting.
might have
Yes, I
been,
hadn't looked at it like that.
well, that might have been a positive moment for them. But actually,
Hmm.
it's like you really learned the wrong thing,
I
from
guess
that.
that's a why. I guess it depends on motives and love, and yeah, I guess you could really drill down and look at that. That's an interesting point. What I took from your um story, so you kind of got on this path. Your mediumship was absolutely starting to flourish. You'd read for people all across the place, but one thing that really jumped out at me is still not really far into your mediumship journey. You was involved in your first missing persons investigation, and because I know I've heard of mediums assisting the police, but how did that kind of even come about in the first place? How did you find yourself being called upon, and can you talk through any of these experiences? I
Yeah.
know they're sensitive.
Um, I mean, it's one of those. There are two that are kind of out there, and not sort of prohibited from talking about. But there are now like 12 of them that are there, but 10 of them are sort of private. And whilst their families and I communicate from time to time, um, it's not a really like common thing. And I respect the fact that they went to a psychic or a spiritualist, whatever, rather than simply just relying on the police. But the first one
Oh,
was
that's
utterly.
interesting. So the people came to you. I thought it would have been the police who
No,
enlisted
no,
you.
no. The police have never done that. And they've always been very good with me, the police, when I've been involved with them. But they have never, ever come to me. And usually the sentence that I get given when I have spoke to them is, try not to do that again, won't you?
Oh,
Which is a bit of a strange statement. But in this country, unlike in the Americas, it is not as uh, well documented. It's not as accepted, which is fine. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. Um, but yeah, I was sat here one night and my phone started ringing, and this man was like, "You can help me find my nephew." And I was like, "I'm afraid I don't know who your nephew is, love. So I'm not sure how I'm supposed to help you." And then he told me this lady had passed my details on. Quite why she had, I cannot for the life of me fathom, because it was only 6, 7 months into the journey itself, the spiritualist journey. But she sent me this person, and I was like, I'm really sorry. I don't know why she's done it. I can't help you. And I went to bed, and when I got into bed, the person involved in this first one was stood by the bed, and he was
wow.
like, I need you to help me. And I jumped out of bed, rang the man back, and was like, does your nephew look like this? Um, does any of this information make sense? And he was like, yeah, that's the one. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to get back to you in the morning, because it was like 2 o'clock in the morning that I got this call. And I just said, I will try to the best of my ability to help you, but I don't know how I'm supposed to. And I think it took us 3 days to find his body. And well, for his mum to find his body, it took us 3 days to get her to be in the right place at the right time to do that. Um, and to this day, I don't know what possessed that woman to send them to me, but they did. And then other people have crept along over time, and then obviously the most well known was last year. Um, I know it sounds daft. I don't ever actually say her name. Um, for some reason that I've just realised. But yeah, so last year was the most noticeable one that most people knew about.
Mm. Are you comfortable with me saying the name?
You can. You're welcome to. I for some reason I personally in these situations I take a sort of moderate vow of silence about it.
Mm. This was obviously the very tragic case of Nicola Bully, who went missing last year in 2023, which you was involved with, and obviously that straight away jumped out at me when I was reading the show notes. I'm not going to ask you to go into the story of that, Jason, because I think that's probably something left for another time. But you know, it's just fascinating that your mediumship has led you down, you know, paths of you know, finding missing people is just incredible. So I want to sort of go on because it sounds to me that your mediumship really has taken you to some funny places and funny stories, because I was even reading about you being called to a house where a family believed the house was haunted, possessed by a spirit, and that was another crazy experience that seemed to happen. Do you want to tell us about that? Because that it made me laugh, and I thought to myself that the amount of stories here.
Oh, honestly, there are in terms, you know, I will say this before I carry on. I think anybody who is involved in the spirit world or spiritualism, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, after a certain length of time looks back and thinks, how on God's earth am I stood here doing this right now? In terms of the previous comment, you know, the morning of finding that lady, realizing that we were going to have to go and do that ourselves and finding her body, I do look back and think, you know, if I had to go back and tell my 8-year-old self maybe what was going to happen, I think he'd have thought I was insane. But you look back and you think, how am I doing these things? Um, you know, how is the world like this? But I mean, in terms of house clearances, you know, I have a lot of time for people who feel that they need their houses cleansing. It's not something I class as my forte. To be honest, and to be very frank, it's not something I have any interest in whatsoever. I just have no desire to get involved in it. Whereas some people, it's their world, it's their everything. They really are cold in that path, and I know some excellent people in that line of work. But I do find in house cleansings, you find the most bizarre um, moments, and you shouldn't laugh. But what some people sort of obviously believe is an evil spirit, or a negative energy, or whatever you call it, a lot of the time is just normal things. Like, you know, for example, I'll give you 3 examples of normal. There was one man who just smoked far too much marijuana on an evening, and that's when the spirits came in, and it was like, what time do the spirits turn up? And he was like, about 9:15. And it's like, and what time on an evening do you have your spliff? And he was like, about 9 o'clock. And it's like, probably not going to do any house cleansing. I'm just going to advise you to cool the drugs down a little bit. Then there was a lady who was experiencing the menopause, and that, I have to say, that was the funniest moment of my entire life, um, from a spiritual point of view, because this lady said that the spirit was rubbing her on the back of the legs. And I was like, well, show me how and where they do this. And she took us upstairs and she laid face down on the bed and put her backside in the air and was like, can you feel them touching me? And I was sat there going, what are we doing? And my friend was like, no, darling, we can't. And she's like, but the spirit's touching me on the bottom now. And I was just like, this is so not right. And I did advise, I typed in on Google all the things she was experiencing. And I did say, like, I think you just need to go to the doctors. I think you've got an early onset menopause. And she actually did go to the doctors, and it turns out it was the menopause, and HRT made this spirit go away, not anybody waving sage. And the third one, which was the most tragic of tragic, my friend texted me and showed me a photograph of this man's back that had been scratched. And I said, I'm not going there. And she was like, I promise them we'll go. And I was like, oh, we really shouldn't. And when we got there, I asked him to lift his top up and show me these scars. And I asked his wife to leave the room. And I just said, I can safely tell you, sir, there is no evil spirit in this house. And it was a human who put those scars on your back. And he was like, is it that obvious? And I was like, it is. And I think it's really tragic that you've told your wife that there's an evil spirit. And I think it's really good of your wife that she believes you. And
I've never seen you, Jason, on the rostrum myself, but I would love to. I think that I can just imagine you give the most charismatic and wonderful readings to people.
well, I mean, those, and I must say this, those are all really serious, their marriage was in a difficult place. That lady's health was in a difficult place. And the gentleman, obviously, from the first story, was taking more drugs than was healthy. But you can't help but laugh at them. I'm a great believer that you have to laugh at life.
I think I have a nervous laugh at the best of times, Jason. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, no, I'm not. That's not nervous laughter. I genuinely found them quite amusing. But they are serious stories, but you have to find the humour in them.
I can relate to that being an ex-police officer. I think it's sometimes what carries you through these times. I wanted to come on and ask you. So you very kindly gave me some of what your passions are. And you touched on a really interesting point of which I have some of my own thoughts in regards to spiritualism and its future. Because I think there is a time, well, the time is now, if we've ever needed the values of spiritualism at any point in humans' history, I can certainly say I think we need it now. Tell us about your thoughts in regards to the future of spiritualism.
Okay. Well, let me just say, because I always, my brain runs in this weird thing. The other one of the last topic, that was the really serious one, was a young boy who was supposedly experiencing a poltergeist, and his family experiencing this terrible poltergeist activity. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't find any spiritual energy in that building to remotely suggest that was happening. What we did find in the end was that the experiences of his family via this poltergeist's aggression was actually the aggression that little boy was experiencing via bullies in school on a day-to-day basis. And every night when he went to bed, this poltergeist, quote unquote, then seemed to manifest against his stepmother. She received bruises in the exact same part of the body as he had bruises from his bullies. She had dreams at night of the exact same things that he had been experiencing in the day. I just thought I'd tidy that up. That was a fascinating one, because to consider that a little boy of like 13 years old created by himself a poltergeist really is quite fascinating, especially if you look at the Fox sisters and what potentially could have been happening there. Like, there may have been no spirit involved. It may have been three young ladies going through the sort of pubescent stage of their life and manifesting a poltergeist themselves. I'm not saying that's true, because I'll get shot if I don't say I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. But there is the possibility that one of the three Fox sisters was actually manifesting a poltergeist via their own telekinetic ability.
Wow.
But to go to your question, so can you repeat it? Sorry, my love.
Not at all. I was sitting on the edge of my seat there. You very kindly told us about some of your passions, and one of the big passions that I took from what you provided to me was that you've got views on spiritualism and its future. More so about the movement in general and where we're going in this world at the moment. What do you think we need to do to kind of promote the values of spiritualism and that of what we practice?
I think the first thing to do is to identify, as I've said to both of the current and former president of the Spiritualist Union. There are two religions that exist within spiritualism at the moment. They live side by side. Within the Spiritualist National Union, there are two religions. One of them is spiritualism in its traditional sense. The other is New Age spirituality. I find it curious that it is New Age spirituality that keeps the bums on the seats and the doors of the churches open. It is the traditional spiritualists who run the churches. It's a very curious thing. And there will come a time where one of those two things has to either merge together or separate and and if they separate, they will very much need to make a very distinctive separation. And I hasten to add that I think if the New Age spirituality is not allowed to take its proper place as the mainstay of spiritualism, true and pure spiritualism will probably fade away because it was a thing made for a certain time and it needs to grow and evolve and move itself forward. I spoke with Minister David Bruton a few years ago, and he said that spiritualism was born at the time that it was because of the death of religious orthodoxy. Now, I would just say this: as much as I respect David incredibly, he's a fantastic philosopher and a lovely man. I couldn't understand how he came to that suggestion because as spiritualism was born, it joined religious orthodoxy. It created churches, it created ministries, it created principles, it campaigned to become a religion. It cashed in on the orthodoxy. And yet apparently it was born to stop the orthodoxy. I think spiritualism was born because it would realize, the spirit world realized what a huge change was about to happen to our world in terms of technology, in terms of science, in terms of social movement. As a historian, we've never lived through a century in human history like the one we just went through. There has never been since the discovery of fire.
You're right. You're totally right.
There has never been a century like it, and so I think the spirit world chose that moment to intersect themselves and say, you're kind of going to need us now. Also at a time where God had never been more unpopular,
Yeah, you were right. We have never evolved at such a trajectory. If you thinking back 100 years, it's just craziness. Even thinking back 10 years to where we've kind of evolved to with technology is scary. And I do think that if this world is going to have a hope of sorting out climate change, sorting out the poles of power, and I think if we're going to save this planet as well from climate change, we need to be putting the very principles and the core pillars of. We need to be living that life because I do worry. It seems I don't have children, but when I look at children and how immersed they are in their Instagrams and whatever, it seems like a far stretch. I do think we are awakening. I do feel that there is some awakening occurring. I've come to the conclusion, and I have no data to base this on other than my own intuition and what I'm seeing. But I do think there has been something since the pandemic where a lot more people have woken up. I keep coming across people who in the last 2-3 years but I'm not sure, am I just attracting those people myself? Because I probably fall into that category.
I mean, I would put it ever so slightly differently because that
Please
idea of
tell
waking
me, give me
awake,
your opinion.
but just that I don't think we were ever asleep. I
Mm.
think we were from the very beginning of our creation, we were awake. We have been drifting into sleep. And the last century was a drift into like proper, we were dozing quite a lot. We'd lost our way.
Yeah, we've gone on to
I,
standby mode if we compare it to a mobile phone.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. We were just waiting to clock ourselves off properly. And
Hmm.
I think a few of us have had that gentle tap that just makes you go, ooh. And it's like, don't go that,
Yes, that's,
don't be swallowed by it. I don't have a mobile phone. Quite by accident, I said to the spirit world, "Oh, I really could do with you helping me get rid of this because it was consuming. And that the very same day I lost it, and I was like, I can't believe I kept it in my hand all day because the spirit said, "We'll get rid of it for you." And I was like, "No, no, no, it's fine, it's fine." And like, "No, you're going to lose it today." So I kept it in my hand, and that very day, because it was in my hand, I put it down somewhere.
how does
And
it feel to live without a mobile phone in this modern world?
amazing. It is amazing. It's so good, and it's so um liberating.
I get it keeps you in the present
like
moment a lot more. I bet you find yourself,
absolutely. I mean, how many people nowadays, and I mean no disrespect to anybody by this, but
yeah.
how many people are willing to sit in their own company and in the silence of their own mind? Because as soon as you leave your friends and your family, etc., you plug music in. And I'm sure for some people that's really beneficial, but having that constant noise drilling into your mind cannot be good. And that constant feeling of people can get hold of you wherever you are. You're never really in a moment of privacy. People
I
sit in
can relate to that because I myself have thought many times, I flirted with the idea, Jason, of not having a mobile, and it's an idea I continue to flirt with, but um, just by virtue of the fact that I work for myself, I just couldn't imagine not having a phone. Well, I would say it's detrimental to my income not having a phone, but I have flirted with the idea, and I can most certainly see the appeal, and I am starting to get to a point where I think when I go on certain holidays, it's going in the hotel safe as some kind of.
It's interesting you say that because yes, I would accept it's probably detrimental to my income as well. Right. I would almost certainly guarantee it is. Um, it
But you're kind
also
of forced onto it now. If you don't have a mobile, you are effectively off the grid, Jason.
Yeah, and there's so much that you can't do without one. And if you go on, like, say you go on your desktop computer to get into your bank or whatever, you literally have to have a phone, and without one, they force you into this deadlock cycle that you can't do anything without it. However, I was in Venice recently, and no disrespect to my best friend, she knows how much I love her. Um, we walked into St. Mark's Square and she was texting away, and I had no phone. And I walked out and was like, wow. I turned around and she's like, and I thought, give her a minute. She'll look up and she'll see this city. This is a
It's
thousand
so
years
true,
old.
though. We all do. Do
And
you know what? We all do it, and we miss out on so many precious moments in life because we're immersed in was someone else's moment, or I'm guilty of it too.
yeah, and it was one of those where, like, we come back and somebody said to me, you didn't take many pictures. And I was like, I don't need to take pictures. I was there.
Uh,
And they were like, it's like when people say there's not many pictures with you in them. And I'm like, I'm in all of the ones that are there. I was taking them. And anyway, so I don't have one. And I think that's marvelous. And I didn't like it at first. It freaked me out. But I think it is really, really healthy to not have one because they are just dangerous. But in terms of spiritualism and its direction, um, I think we're in a good position at the moment. We've got in a lot better position. Our current president, Jackie, has moved us into a good footing to sort of put ourselves back in a direction where we need to be. But there is more that we need to do. And some of that comes from like just practical things, how to make it easier to access services, find out information. Others of it, I think, are much deeper in terms of our ethos. I mean, one thing that terrifies me at the moment, and people can disagree with me if they wish, but I would argue I'm probably left of centre. And when I see fellow spiritualists publishing things about anti-immigration and against, people coming to this country and essentially quoting far-right philosophy, I do worry how a spiritualist can think those things because, the brotherhood of man is the second principle. The idea of universal love, I think, is the most important and profound concept out there. And I think we need to have a genuine look at our philosophy. I think, and I mean this so politely, but I think spiritualism, meaning the religion of, has largely lost its message. I don't think it knows what it's saying at the moment, and I think it needs to reflect on what it is saying.
I do agree to some respect. I think especially if there's going to be an appeal to a younger crowd as well. I think that there needs to be, because a big part of spiritualism in one way or another is about healing. And I think that there needs to be much more of an emphasis on, because most people, well, I say most people, again, I have no information to base this off, only from all the stories that I hear. But a lot of people arrive at a spiritualist church after either a loss of someone, going through a traumatic event, or, and I think a focus on healing is very important. And I do think there needs to be a better way of getting information out there in this modern day and age. I do think that. But again, we're trying to bring something like spiritualism into the digital age, which is no mean feat, and it's riddled with politics and heritage, and there's a lot of factors at play.
I mean, without going into a browbeating session, I was told the other day by somebody about the manner of my dress when I did a service. I do services very relaxed. I think I've wore a shirt and tie to a service maybe 3 times. And I can say this, I turned up at Blackburn Spiritualist Church about 6 years ago. I had been given a call whilst I was out shopping when I still was on the old little device. And the booking secretary said, please, Jason, turn up to church tonight. There's been a cancellation. Will you do the service? And I was like, I'll do the service, but I'm not dressed. Not dressed for this at all. And he was like, I don't care what you're dressed as. Just get here, do the service. That's all I need. And I was like, I cannot stress to you enough how not appropriately dressed I am to be taking the service. And it's like, I don't care, Jason. Just get here. So I was like, right, I'm coming. I got there. I stood on the rostrum, introducing myself to the president. And this gentleman walked up behind me and he said, excuse me, lad, what are you doing up there? I said, oh, I'm your medium tonight. He went, not looking like that, you're not. So I suggest you get down. I was in a vest, beanie, shorts, and flip-flops, and just totally not dressed for divine service. And I said, I'm really sorry. This is how I told him I wasn't appropriately dressed. And he says, well, lad, considering how you've come, I don't hold out your mediumship is going to be any good. So I was like, fair enough, but you have 5 minutes to find a new medium or let me do it. Anyway, I did it. And he come and he said, next time trousers would be nice. So I was like, do trousers next time.
Well,
and the next time I turned up, he was my chairperson, and he was like, I'd never let anyone chair for you other than me again because I enjoyed your service so much. And let me do just say this: that last week, some lady pulled me on my dress code, and she says, Jason, if we lose our sense of dress, we'll lose our religion. And I said, well, we lost 20,000 members and 200 churches before that, and we kept the suit and shirt and tie. So it's doing a cracking job for us now, isn't it? And she was, I think some people hold on to things that they just don't matter anymore. They really don't. And you can't lose a religion so long as people still believe in it. You can lose practices, you can lose rituals and ways of being, but you can't lose a religion or a belief by getting rid of those things. And I will say this, and I'm sorry to like Twitter on, but like you said there about bring the young people in, and
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely vital. But even though I am one of the world's like biggest advocates that we must bring in young people, we must focus on healing because healing is what young people are more interested in, I think, than actually mediumship, and shift
Yes.
that focus back to the healing, but not just to the spiritual healing. But I think our churches should actually start to work on bringing some proper different healing modalities in, different healing therapies, not just crystal healing or Reiki healing, but inner child therapy, etc. And some of the ones of the chats you've had on here. But I don't think we should focus on the young people at the expense of the maturer generation or the more mature generation. My nana is 86 today, or tomorrow actually. She wants
happy
more than
birthday
anything.
to her.
I know. But she wants more than anything to have something to believe in. And she doesn't. And I mean it so nicely. Death for her feels a lot closer than it does for me, because 86, she's counting on like two hands now the number of years in total she may get. Last time I spoke to her, she said, I wish so much I could believe what you believe. But that I think there is a room for people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to still reach those people. And I mean, I would say I think we should have statutory time limits or age limits on committees to sort of force people to move along. It's not really popular with everybody, but...
Well, do you know what? I think you make some very interesting points, Jason. So, do you know what? I could have spoken to you for so much longer, but we are out of time. If you want to find out more about Jason, just check out the show notes where you'll be able to find out more about him. Jason, thank you for your time, your lovely energy, and for coming onto the Soul Sync podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, there we go. That was my conversation with Jason Rothwell. It's been really nice to have you with us on this edition of the Soul Sync today. Do remember you can always get in touch with the show. I love hearing from you. I love your comments. I just love reading your emails. Just go to the show notes where the email address is there. Do remember you can go over to my YouTube channel. I will be putting some new content up there soon, where you can just sort of keep up with what I'm up to in my spiritual journey. Just go over to YouTube, Jason Paul Medium. That's it for this week's edition. It's been lovely to have you here, and until next time, lots of love.